The road had been empty for hours. Thick, gnarled trees lined the cracked asphalt, their twisted branches arching overhead, blocking out the fading afternoon light. My motorhome rumbled along the road, the only sound in the suffocating silence of the forest. I checked my phone again. No signal. Not even a single bar. I had been driving for most of the day, following a scenic route through this remote stretch of wilderness, but something felt off. The deeper I went, the heavier the air became. The trees stood unnaturally still, as if waiting, watching. A bad feeling had been creeping in my gut since I passed a rusted road sign about an hour back. The name was too worn to read, but someone had scrawled, "Don't stop," across it in jagged black letters. I had laughed it off at first, thinking it was some prank from a local bored out of their mind. Now I wasn't laughing. The sun had almost disappeared behind the trees when my motorhome suddenly lurched. The engine sputtered, coughed, then died. I gripped the wheel, heart slamming against my ribs. "Come on! Come on!" I muttered, turning the key. The engine clicked uselessly. I checked the fuel gauge, plenty left. Battery should be fine, too. So what the hell happened? Leaning forward, I peered through the windshield. The forest was too dark now, swallowing the road ahead. I hadn't passed another car in hours. I was completely alone. A shiver crawled up my spine. The silence outside was absolute. No birds, no wind, no distant rustling of animals in the underbrush. Just nothing. I exhaled, shaking off the unease. I had a bed, food, water. I'd wait until morning and figure it out then. As I pulled the curtains closed over the windshield, I swore I saw something move between the trees. A fleeting, pale shape. I froze, stared. Nothing. Just shadows. Still, I double-checked the locks before turning off the cabin lights. Then, in the suffocating silence of the motorhome, I heard it. A single, distant scream. Far away, but unmistakable. I held my breath, ears straining. The scream faded into the night, swallowed by the endless black forest. I told myself it was my imagination. I told myself everything was fine. I told myself I wasn't trapped. But the moment I lay down, I heard it again. And this time, it was closer. The scream faded, swallowed by the dense forest, but its echo lingered in my chest. I sat up in my bed, heart hammering, listening, waiting. Nothing. The silence stretched, thick and unnatural. I wanted to believe it was some distant animal, a fox or a coyote, but the sound had been too human. A wail of pure, desperate terror. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. I exhaled shakily and ran a hand down my face. I was being paranoid. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. And then a knock. A soft, hesitant tap-tap against the motorhome door. I froze. The sound was so gentle that for a second, I wondered if I had imagined it. Then it came again. Tap-tap. My skin prickled with ice. I hadn't heard any footsteps. No rustling of undergrowth, no approach. Just the knock, sudden and impossibly quiet. I swallowed, my mouth dry as sand. "Hello!" My voice cracked. Silence. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, pressing my feet against the cold floor. My hands shook as I reached for the curtain covering the small side window. I hesitated. Something deep in my gut screamed not to look. But I had to. Slowly, I lifted the edge of the curtain just an inch, just enough to peek outside. The darkness was thick. My own reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale and wide-eyed. I saw nothing beyond it. Then, from just outside the door, "Let me in." I jerked back, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was male, low, but wrong, like a radio frequency that wasn't quite tuned in. "Please, I need help." My body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The voice was close, right outside, but I still heard no footsteps, no movement, just the voice, floating in the dead air. "Let me in." This time, the words were softer, almost pleading. I forced myself to speak. Who are you?" Silence. I waited, every second stretching endlessly. Then came a new sound, a soft, rhythmic scratching. Long, deliberate strokes against the metal door. My stomach twisted into a cold knot. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The scratching stopped. And then, please. But now the voice was different. Higher. A woman's voice. I felt the air leave my lungs. I hadn't heard anyone walk away. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. Worse than the voice. I stayed there, frozen, staring at the door as the minutes stretched into hours. Somewhere outside, in the blackness of the forest, something was waiting. And it wasn't alone. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, back pressed against the far wall of the motorhome, staring at the door, waiting. For hours there was nothing. No more knocks, no more voices. Just the suffocating silence of the forest. So thick it felt like it was pressing against the windows. I told myself it was over. I told myself I was safe. And then, tap. A single, deliberate tap against the glass. Not the door this time. The window. The one just beside me. A cold sweat broke across my skin. My body refused to move, but my eyes flicked toward the glass. Toward my own faint reflection in the darkness. And beyond it, something else stared back at me. I sucked in a breath. It was a face. Or something trying to be a face. The features were all wrong, too wide, too stretched. The mouth was slightly open, lips trembling like it was trying to form words but didn't quite know how. But the eyes, they were the worst part. Too many of them. Small, beady, and clustered together like something from a nightmare. They blinked, not in unison, but in waves, like ripples on water. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then it smiled. A slow, unnatural stretch of its mouth, revealing jagged, splintered teeth. Tap, tap, tap. It lifted one long, gnarled finger and dragged it down the glass, leaving behind a thin, black smear. My stomach lurched. I scrambled back, nearly knocking over the small table behind me. And then, please, let me in. The voice was soft now, almost friendly, but it didn't come from the mouth on the other side of the glass. It came from inside the motorhome. Behind me, I whirled around. The cabin was empty. The shadows had stretched, deep and wrong, like they had weight to them, like they were huddling in the corners, breathing, watching. Let me in. The voice was closer now, whispering in my ear. I lunged for the light switch and slammed it on. The cabin flooded with yellow light. And just like that, the voice was gone. I spun back toward the window. The thing outside was gone, too. Just the streak it had left behind, still glistening against the glass. But I knew it wasn't over. The night was still deep. The forest was still waiting. And whatever was out there, whatever had whispered in my ear, wasn't done with me yet. I didn't turn the lights off again. For the next few hours, I sat at the small table in my motorhome, gripping a kitchen knife I had pulled from the drawer. My knuckles were white, my breath shallow. I told myself I would stay awake until sunrise. I told myself I wouldn't let my guard down. But exhaustion crept in like a slow poison. My eyelids grew heavy, my grip loosened, and at some point, I must have drifted off. Because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of breathing. Not my own. Deep, slow, wet. I snapped upright, gasping, knife clutched in my hand. My eyes darted around the cabin. Empty. Then I heard it again. Not inside the motorhome. Underneath it. My stomach turned to ice. The motorhome sat on high suspension. There was just enough space beneath it for someone or something to crawl under. I held my breath, straining to listen. The breathing was deep and labored, like something struggling to inhale through shattered ribs. Then a scrape, something shifting against the dirt. It was moving. My pulse pounded against my skull. I slowly got to my feet, every instinct screaming at me not to make a sound. Then a whisper. I see you. My vision swam. It hadn't come from under the motorhome. It had come from directly behind me. I whipped around. The air was empty. The shadows trembled. And then the motorhome rocked. Hard. The whole vehicle lurched to one side, as if something massive had just thrown its full weight against it. I stumbled, grabbing onto the counter to keep from falling. My knife slipped from my grip, clattering onto the floor. Another impact. Bang. The motorhome tilted. My lungs seized. It was trying to flip me over. I lunged for the driver's seat, fumbling with the keys even though I knew the engine was dead. My hands shook violently as I turned the ignition. Nothing. Just that same clicking sound. Bang! The entire vehicle shuddered. And then silence. No breathing. No scraping. Just the hum of the overhead lights and the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't dare move. I barely even breathed. Then, just beneath me, a single, slow knock against the floor. From inside the motorhome, something had gotten in. The knock came again. Soft, slow, deliberate. From beneath the floorboards, I gripped the edge of the counter, my pulse hammering in my throat. The motorhome didn't have a basement. There was no crawl space beneath the floor. But something was there. I stayed perfectly still, ears straining. The knock turned into a dragging sound, like fingernails scraping against the wood beneath my feet. Then a whisper. "I found you." My entire body locked up. The voice was directly beneath me. And then the floor creaked. I jumped back, nearly knocking over the small table. My breath came in ragged gasps. I needed to get out. Now, I grabbed the door handle, but the moment my fingers touched it, bang, the entire motorhome shook violently, like something had slammed into it from the outside. I yelped, stumbling backward. My heart was in my throat. Then another knock, but this time it came from the ceiling. My breath hitched. I looked up. The roof creaked under a shifting weight. Something was crawling up there. Then, from just outside the door, "Let me in." The voice was soft, calm, like it belonged to an old friend. I clamped a hand over my mouth, biting back a whimper. "Please." The voice was different now, higher, a child's voice. "Go away," I croaked. Silence. Then the door handle turned. I lunged forward, throwing my entire weight against the door. The lock held, but barely. The handle rattled violently, twisting and jerking like something on the other side was desperate to get in. Then, just beside my ear, from the other side of the door, a breath. Slow, warm, too close. I'm already inside. I spun around. The cabin was empty, but the shadows in the corners shifted. Something was in here with me, watching, waiting. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. The shadows moved. Not like shifting light or the sway of tree branches outside. No, these shadows had weight. They breathed, stretched, recoiled. And they were watching me. I pressed my back against the door, my pulse a rapid hammer against my ribs. My eyes flicked between the dark corners of the motorhome, trying to catch a shape, a figure, anything, nothing, just the feeling of being watched. And then, the lights flickered. For half a second, everything plunged into darkness. Then, as the lights sputtered back on, there was a hand. A single, pale, gnarled hand reaching out from the shadows beneath the small dining table. The fingers were too long, the knuckles twisted at unnatural angles. Stretched toward me, slow and patient. I choked on a scream and kicked the table over. Dishes shattered as the wood crashed against the floor. But the hand was gone. The shadow under the table was just a shadow again. I gasped for air, backing toward the driver's seat. I gripped the cold leather, shaking, my mind spinning. Then a whisper. "I just want to touch you." I whimpered. My skin crawled with ice. The voice was close. Too close. I turned my head just an inch toward the passenger seat, and there it was, sitting in the seat beside me. A shape humanoid but not. Its body was thin, almost stretched, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The skin was pale and mottled, like something pulled from a lake after too many days. But the worst part, it had no face, just smooth, damp flesh where eyes, a nose, a mouth should have been. My body locked up. The thing twitched, and then it moved. Its head snapped toward me in a jerky, unnatural motion. The skin where its face should be rippled. I threw myself backward. The thing lunged. I screamed. I hit the floor hard, scrambling backward until my spine slammed against the cabinet. My shaking hands grasped blindly for something, anything, to defend myself. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the counter and swung it wildly. And just like that, the thing was gone. The passenger seat was empty. Only the overturned table and shattered dishes remained. The shadows had stilled. The air was silent. But I knew better. I wasn't alone. The thing was still here. It was just waiting for the lights to go out again. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. The motorhome was silent again, but the air felt wrong, thick and heavy, like the moment before a storm. The overturned table, the shattered dishes, the empty passenger seat. It all felt staged, like it was waiting for me to make the next move. I tightened my grip on the flashlight, my knuckles white, my only weapon, my only source of light. I had two choices: stay here and wait for whatever was inside with me to make its move, or get out. Every instinct screamed not to open that door, but I couldn't stay trapped in here with it. Slowly, I reached for the handle. I counted to 3. Then I yanked the door open. The cold night air rushed in, heavy with the damp scent of earth and trees. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the forest beyond. Nothing, just my empty campsite. The same twisted trees, the same dirt road. But something felt different. The forest was too dark. The shadows between the trees were too deep. Like the night itself was pressing in, watching. I swallowed hard and stepped outside. The leaves crunched beneath my boots. My breath came fast and shallow. Then, behind me, the motorhome door slammed shut. I spun around. The vehicle stood there, silent, looming. My flashlight beam trembled against the metal. I hadn't touched the door. I reached out, fingers shaking, and then, from inside the motorhome, a whisper. "You shouldn't have left." My blood turned to ice. I staggered back, my breath caught in my throat, and then, something knocked on the window. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I forced myself to look, and there, staring out at me from inside the motorhome, was my own face. But it wasn't me. It smiled. Then it raised one hand and beckoned. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just stood there, flashlight trembling in my grip, staring at my own face through the window of the motorhome. It looked exactly like me. Same messy hair, same wide, terrified eyes. But the smile was wrong. Too wide, too knowing. And when it raised its hand and beckoned me closer, I felt something deep inside me break. No, I took a step back. My entire body screamed at me to run. But then, the door creaked open. A slow, deliberate movement, like it was inviting me in. The thing wearing my face tilted its head, watching me, waiting. "Where are you going?" spoke with my voice. I choked on a scream. Then, from behind me, a crunch. I spun around, flashlight beam slashing through the trees. The undergrowth shifted. Something was out there. Something else. I was surrounded. Panic clawed up my throat. The flashlight beam flickered as I turned back to the motorhome. The thing inside was gone. The cabin was dark. But the door was still open. Waiting. Inviting. I took a shaky step toward it, torn between the terror of what was inside and the unknown horror in the woods. Then, a whisper, drifting from the blackness behind me. "There's nowhere to go." A shape moved in the trees. I bolted for the motorhome. I leapt inside and slammed the door shut, locking it, chest heaving. My flashlight flickered. And then, from the dark interior of the motorhome, something breathed. Slow, wet, close. The light flickered again. And for a split second, in the brief burst of illumination, I saw them, more than one. Dozens of pale, twisted things crouching in the shadows, waiting. And then, the light went out, and the whisper came again. "Let me in." The light was gone, and they were in here with me. I could hear them, the soft shuffle of feet, the slow, wet sound of something breathing, the whisper of skin dragging against the walls. My fingers fumbled, shaking, pressing against the flashlight switch. Click, click, click. Nothing. The battery was dead. And then, a whisper, right next to my ear. "You shouldn't have come here." I threw myself backward, heart hammering so hard it felt like it would crack my ribs. My hands hit the counter, sending something crashing to the floor. My breath came in ragged gasps, the darkness thick and pulsing around me. Then, a sharp, bone-snapping sound. I gagged. It was too close. I forced myself to move, crawling blindly through the dark. My hands found the cabinets, the floor, something soft and damp that I prayed wasn't flesh. And then, fingertips brushed the back of my neck. I screamed. Something giggled. I lunged forward, slamming into the driver's seat. My hands scrambled for the keys, even though I knew the engine was dead. But this time, when I twisted them, the engine roared to life. I didn't question it, didn't think. I just slammed my foot onto the gas. The motorhome lurched forward, tires kicking up dirt. The weight inside shifted, they moved with me. Something slammed against the back wall. A horrible, wet thump. Another thing scraped its nails across the ceiling, dragging deep, splintering grooves into the metal. I gritted my teeth, pushing the pedal to the floor. Faster, faster. Get out, get out. The headlights cut through the trees, and for the first time I saw them clearly. Dozens of figures lined the forest on either side of the road. Not human. Wrong. Their skin hung loose, like it had been peeled and stitched back together. Their arms were too long, too thin. And their faces, some had no eyes, some had too many, and some had my face. They grinned as I tore past them, their mouths too wide, too hungry. One of them whispered, its voice right next to my ear, "You'll never leave." And then, the road ended, a sheer cliff, a black abyss below. I slammed my foot on the brakes. Too late. The motorhome skidded forward, tires screaming against the dirt. The cliff's edge loomed closer, the abyss opening up beneath me. The weight behind me shifted, and something laughed. Then, impact, impact. For a split second, I felt weightless. The motorhome lurched forward, the front half tipping over the cliff's edge. Gravity grabbed hold, dragging me toward the abyss. But then a jolt. The back tires caught on something, just enough. The motorhome teetered, rocking violently, but didn't fall. I was alive. For now. My breath came in short, broken gasps. My hands were locked around the wheel, white-knuckled, frozen. And then, the whisper, "You don't belong here," came from everywhere. From inside the motorhome, from the trees, from the wind itself. I forced myself to move. My fingers clawed at the door handle, legs scrambling for solid ground. I had to get out. I had to. The weight shifted behind me. Something moved. Slow, deliberate footsteps. The cabin creaked under its weight. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. But I could hear it breathing. The same slow, wet inhale. The same rattling exhale. And then, a hand on my shoulder. Cold. Wet. Wrong. I screamed and wrenched myself forward, slamming the door open and throwing myself out. My body hit the dirt hard, rolling, scraping against the jagged ground. Pain exploded through me. I gasped, trying to push myself up. And then, the motorhome moved. The weight inside lunged forward. And just like that, tipped. I watched, heart hammering against my ribs, as the motorhome lurched over the edge. For a brief, horrible moment, I saw it. A shape pressed against the windshield. It was me, or what used to be me. I smiled. And then, the motorhome vanished into the black abyss. Gone. Swallowed by the darkness. Silence. Only the wind remained, whispering through the trees. I sat there for a long time. Then slowly I turned. The forest was empty. No figures. No whispering voices. No things with too many eyes. Just the road. Just me. I staggered to my feet, trembling. My legs barely held me up. Then a flicker. I looked down at my phone. 1 bar. I sucked in a sharp breath, my fingers fumbling as I opened my GPS. The road was there again. I wasn't lost anymore. I turned my back on the abyss and started walking. I didn't stop. Not even when I heard footsteps behind me. Not even when I heard a voice. My own voice. Whisper, "You never left."